welcome to Mark Hummel's Harmonica Party. And I'm sitting here with Dennis Gruenling, and we are in a hotel in Tacoma, Washington. And we're going to be talking to Dennis about his career and how he got started and all the other good stuff. How you got your badass harmonica started. And man, I think I first met you at Spa, and I don't even remember what year it was.
I think so.
It was way back, like it was Detroit maybe?
It may have been like in the mid-90s.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I probably had seen you before then, though. Probably at Manny's or Chicago Blues in New York City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back when I was almost as young as you.
Almost, yeah.
So anyway, yeah, you were interested. I remember you interviewed me about George Smith, I think, and William Clark.
Yeah.
So those were obviously big influences for you.
Yeah.
How did you how was it you latched on to like the West Coast guys? Because that's kind of a different route.
Well, before I played harp, I was always into music. I mean, the harp wasn't, I want to, play music,
Right.
let me play harp. I was always into music. And I grew up, I heard a lot of old school traditional country from my dad. It was old school country western music.
Okay.
My mom liked oldies, which was all 50s stuff. Half of
Right.
it was like 50s R&B, Fats Domino, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Which I loved. And I also remember hearing some big band swing kind of stuff, kind of the poppy stuff, but still a lot of swing and big band stuff.
Right.
And I was into all that stuff. I loved music, and when I discovered blues, I guess it was around 89 or 90 or something.
Mm-hmm.
I got my first harmonica the day I heard my first blues album, because I got it from a friend of the family who was like an uncle, and he plays guitar and harmonica.
How old
and
were
stuff.
you?
I was, 16, 17 maybe.
Okay.
And he asked if I wanted a harmonica as a gift. And he knew I was into music. He played a little harmonica.
Right.
I just thought, okay, cool. I heard some of the rockers, Ozzy and Zeppelin and some other,
Right.
New York Dolls,
Right.
And I just said, sure, okay, whatever. But there was a catch. He wanted a gift in return.
What was that?
Well, he asked for a Harp Attack.
Oh.
And I was already a record freak.
All right.
So I knew where I didn't know anything about Harp Attack or Alligator Records, but he
Right.
told me about it, and I knew a few record stores I could call to special order, because
okay.
I was already buying records all the time.
Yeah.
And I called up from Vintage Vinyl in New Jersey, and they're closed now. They closed up during the pandemic, actually. But I ordered this record, and we met around the holiday, family gathering around the holidays, and he gave me a harmonica and a cassette, and I gave him this album. It had James Cotton, Junior Wells, Carrie
Right.
Bell, Billy Branch. And I'm looking at this album as I give it to him. I saw it, but I just wrapped it up and gave it to him. But, and I've got the picture on the back, and they're holding harmonicas. I'm like, I gotta hear this now, because you just gave me a harp,
Right.
So I put it on. I'll never forget putting on the record and hearing it for the first time, and like my mind was blown, because I heard all these little things, these sounds that I heard, some of it in country, in old school, and I heard some of it in the 50s and in the big band stuff, but it was like in concentrated form.
Right.
It was like it was undiluted.
Yeah.
And I was
Amplified.
like, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
I was just amazed that there was a whole style of music, was this concentrated stuff that I knew nothing about. How come
Right.
people didn't talk about it?
So that was the first blues record you
That was the first blues record. And
Wow.
after that, not long after that, I saw in one of the first blues things I read, I saw a review for William Clark's Blowing Like Hell, which
Right.
had just come out.
Right.
And so I got that, and I got, I sent away to Elderly Instruments, I think. And,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
through the mail for that. And also the first blues radio show that I listened to played It's Too Late Brother from Rod Piazza's Blues in the Dark, which came out around the same time.
Huh. Okay.
And I wrote down that name, and I got a few of his records, and and I was reading that they were both, you know, kind of mentored by George Smith.
Right.
And I
right.
immediately was like, I gotta find out who George Smith was. I was
Right.
already a record freak, but now
Right.
it was just like in the blues world, and I just every weekend
Yeah.
I was buying records like
Yeah.
nonstop.
Yeah.
So when I just loved that stuff because it was blues, but it was also swinging. Like I
Right.
was familiar with
Right.
the 50s R&B and the big band stuff, and I was like, it just
Yeah.
felt like
Kind of they mixed the
Yeah,
two. Yeah,
yeah.
there was an element of definitely an element of the horn players.
totally.
Yeah, in
So-
those guys.
Yeah, so it made a lot of sense to my ears.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And yeah, that's kind of how that started.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So that must be thrilling though that you know Rod now pretty well.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw Bill a bunch of times. I mean,
Right.
I saw them both within that first year I was playing harp because
Right.
Rod came to support that album. When
Right.
Rod came to support that album, I
Right.
met Henry back then. Henry was just passed away.
Right. Right.
And yeah, I was just kind of, my mind was blown seeing these guys play harmonica, sounding like that.
Live. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So, did you pick up like both chromatic and diatonic around the same time?
The next year for Christmas, I got a chromatic.
Okay.
I was bugging everybody,
Yeah.
you know,
All
because
right.
it looked so cool in that
Yeah.
picture. Everybody's holding it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
figured if I could just learn how to play one song on that, that would be cool.
Right. Right.
And yeah, but I mean, that was my life. I mean,
So
I
did you take lessons and stuff?
no lessons. I tried to take lessons from one player who was on the scene now. We're still kind of friends. But the lesson went down like this, you know, because he was also friends with Cotton, who
Right.
I had seen and I got to jam with Luther
Right.
Tucker
Right.
when I was young back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know, show me some of that stuff since you know that style. And he showed me these licks, and one, I already knew the licks.
Right.
Because I already figured
Right.
I was, at that time I was really studying and like just spending my days listening and playing all the
Right.
time.
Right.
So I knew the licks already, but he was also like telling me the wrong notes and stuff. Like I don't think he was doing it on purpose, he just didn't really know.
Didn't know. Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I'm not taking lessons from anybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm all self-taught from listening to the record and playing and listening. And
Yeah.
just
So
figuring
you would
this-
copy the record basically.
I would copy the record, yeah, and I would listen to stuff, and I did some ear training because at the time, right before I dropped out of high school, I had a bass player friend of mine. He was into blues, but he was more into funk and rock stuff. But he had a piano,
Right.
so we did some ear training for intervals. And it wasn't like I planned out to do that, but he was learning some of that basic theory stuff on bass.
Right.
And I was like, well, it kind of made sense to my ear somehow. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, let me learn this too, you know? And
Yeah.
I would learn the thirds and the fifths, and I'd take that home and practice it and learn it. And I was
Right.
like, it really made sense because all that is when you're learning these intervals and the scale degrees is you're just like putting names to these sounds that you're already familiar with.
Mhm.
It's like putting names to faces you're familiar with.
Right,
And then I was
right.
like, oh, you're Bob, you're Mark. You know, then all of a sudden some of the pieces,
Something I'm worse and worse at.
but you know, like the pieces of the puzzle start making more sense
Right.
in your brain.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I taught myself.
Yeah, and
Just-
harmonica is so important when it comes to the ear
Oh, yeah.
because you're really you don't have anything, you know, you're playing like this, you can't see what's going
Yeah.
on like you can other instruments.
Yeah, the only other kind of musician who's at with that same handicap as us is a vocalist.
Right.
Because they can't
Right.
see what they're doing, like
That's
on a
right.
guitar, piano. Okay, I hit this.
Right.
This is the C, and
Exactly.
this is the here on the horn
Yep.
or whatever. But on harp, you really have to rely on your ear
Yeah.
even more. Yeah,
Totally. So you must have spent hours practicing.
hours. There was a period. I had moved down to right outside of New Orleans for the better part of a year. My girlfriend at the time got an internship, and she wasn't gonna go if I didn't go with her.
Right.
And but I was thinking New Orleans, you know, jazz, blues, it's gonna be great. I'm gonna
Right.
meet people and play and, you know, figure, you know,
And
learn
there's
stuff.
none there.
Yeah, I did. I met, but I was young. Nobody knew me, and
Yeah,
most of them didn't want to be bothered with me. But I met Johnny Sansone.
Oh, did
Who was
you?
originally
Okay.
from New Jersey.
Right, right,
I met Rock and Jake, who was actually
Okay.
pretty cool with me.
right.
They were both actually pretty nice to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, like being on the scene, long haired, hippie looking, Yankee living down there was
Right.
not, I loved it down there. Culture's beautiful. The people were nice, but it was a different lifestyle. And I got so frustrated not really meeting people who like want to show me stuff or just learning stuff from people. I
Right.
basically locked myself in the apartment most of the time, and I was practicing 8, 10, 12 hours a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after I got home, because I wanted something to show for when I got home,
Right.
and I kept that practice schedule for almost another year after I got back home.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense, man. So I like every day. I still have a calendar from back then, and every day I was learning like a song or a
Wow.
solo or two, like Little Walter solo on this Muddy Water song,
Right.
and then Big Walter solo on this song,
Right.
or this James Cotton instrumental, or this George
Right.
Smith song. Every day was.
That's how you do it.
It was crazy, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really takes that kind of commitment, I think, to really become a good player.
Totally, it
Yeah.
does. It
Yeah.
does.
Without that, I don't see how it can happen.
And you can be a good player even before doing that and without doing it, but you're not going to have that full scope,
Right.
really.
You won't have
You
the
know.
arsenal
Right.
of licks and styles and positions and all
Right.
that,
And-
all that kind of stuff.
And to be clear, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way, and I think most, top tier musicians also feel this way, that you're not learning, at least for me, I'm not learning licks to learn a lick, to just kind of go on stage and play
Right.
a lick. You learn the licks and you learn the songs as well as you can, just to kind of know the language,
Right.
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 I mean, and then
And familiarize yourself with the instrument.
sure, of course,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because it helps you do that.
totally, yeah.
So, did you go out and buy an amplifier right away or a microphone?
Well, I gotta, yeah, because I didn't learn that lesson that quick. I think I went back to that same guy and I bought a microphone from him, figuring at least, I still want to be friends with the guy. He knew people and he was a
Right.
good player.
Right.
And I bought a microphone, and this set me off on a different journey as well. I saved money for this microphone, which was more than I could afford at the time, and it was in a static with the crystal helmet. And I paid it, and I took it home, and the thing was terrible. Looking back at it now, it was just weak and it didn't work well. But I was so upset and felt burned by the guy. That set me on track to start looking for my own microphones.
And that's another thing that you got way into.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was still in high school, and I was just, I was like, I'm gonna screw this guy. I'm just gonna find my own microphones and I'll put them together. I knew a little bit about soldering from my dad. Not microphones, but I learned it.
Right.
And so I started fixing up microphones for myself, and then the local players like, "Oh, where'd you get that?" And I'm like, "Well, I just put this together." And then, before you know it, people were asking, "Can you fix this microphone? Can I give this to you? Can you build me one?" And it, the years went by, and I would just develop a collection and then repair and build, and it became an obsession. And part of the obsession, though, was, one of the first Little Walter songs I heard was "Sad Hours," and
Right.
the sound on that just blew my mind. I
Right.
fell in love, between seeing, Rod Piazza and William Clark and James Cotton early on, and then hearing that Little Walter stuff, especially that song. It just,
Yeah.
my mind was blown by the possibilities of sound.
Yeah.
The textures and the
Yeah.
overtones, how rich that can be.
Right.
I'm more fascinated probably now than I ever was, and I have more fun with the gear now, I think, just because you develop your skills for so long. I have a better appreciation, I think, every year.
Right.
Of the sounds and the tones, and so
Right.
I love that stuff.
So man, that's a long time you've been collecting mics.
Yeah.
How did you find mics early on? Was it like pawn shops or?
I went to a few pawn shops. Was not that lucky. I went to a lot of flea markets.
Flea markets. Okay.
And swap meets, but mainly a lot of flea markets
Okay.
early on when I was younger. And I remember finding, this probably is what got me hooked. The first flea market I went to, one of the first tables when I stepped, it was a big, huge flea market too. And one of the
Right.
first tables I went up to, it was just a pile of junk there. But I saw there was probably an old crappy guitar there and some music stuff and cassettes and records and whatever. But after going through the pile, I spotted a JT30.
Wow.
And it was $5, and I was like,
Wow.
I was like, it's like, you know, when you go gambling and you win.
That was like gold.
I won $10,000 my first day.
Right.
Now I'm hooked.
Right.
And of course, I've never found one for $5 since that
right.
day.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it was just it reeled me in, and I was just I became fascinated with the looks, and eventually, the more I experimented and found good examples of all these different microphones, I got so excited about the sounds of them and the aesthetics and all of that. So I just really got into that. But I remember going to high school. I was still in high school, and I would get those Turner mics, and I was chopping the Turner mics back then before many other people really were.
Really?
And I kind of got tired of it though, because I just wanted mics that were already cool looking and bullet shaped, that I didn't have to mess with, because I thought it was just kind of, why do that if there's already so many cool microphones out there?
So when you say chop, what would you do exactly?
I would the shop teachers, the metal shop, and I mean the
Right.
wood shop too, but I wasn't doing much with the mics there. But the metal shop teacher would let me stay after school and like cut apart. You know, I'd be chopping those Turner microphones and get the necks off, and then
Okay. So you would take off the fin or whatever.
not so much the fin, but just the neck. You know, those Turner mics, they're connected to a neck piece and the stand.
Okay. So
And
it would
people
all be
chop
one
the
piece.
neck. Yeah, people chop the necks off.
Right.
So it just looks like a bullet head. But
Right.
those mics aren't like a traditional bullet mic. It's like a
Interesting.
one-piece
Okay.
desk stand and neck,
Right.
and yeah.
Right.
So
And the aesthetics and the
Shures.
Shures were all on a wooden one, but you could unscrew it.
right. Yeah, wooden or metal, and you can just unscrew the head. So it's, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you kind of get into selling those right away?
Not right away, but eventually, when I was doing more and more repairs for local players, people would just be like, "Oh, can I just buy a mic from you?"
Right.
And I just started, you know, because I was building them for myself. Eventually, I just started building them for other people, and then other people asked these people, "Oh, where'd you get that?" And it just built up slowly, year after year after year after year. Yeah.
Now, how do you find them now? Because they're so rare now.
Well, I don't find that many now. But I mean, it's like over 3+ decades later.
Yeah, and
You
you
know?
probably got a pretty good.
I
Supply
probably have
of
the
it.
biggest collection of stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
But you know, I have a collection just because I got fascinated with finding different examples of different models over the years. But I also have, you know, I mean, I have a collection of things that I build from.
Right.
You know, or people ask me for requests for certain microphones. But lately, I got most of the microphones that I have from years ago.
Okay.
And most of the stuff I get now, if I get something new, it's usually from a trade.
Right.
Or, I mean, I know collectors and players around the world.
I bet.
So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm still fascinated with it.
Yeah. Well, it
The
is
sound.
really fun when you can find that stuff and find it for a good price. It is pretty thrilling.
Yeah.
So with playing, did you start playing in bands right away, or looking for people to play with right away?
No.
You did.
I didn't. I'm not really one to chase after the spotlight, really. So I would.
Well, look at you now.
Well, yeah. I mean, I still don't really chase the spotlight. I just kind of I grew into what I do.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
But you know, because you'll I know you're kind of busting my chops, and Nick Moss would
No,
say
I'm
the
just
same
joking
thing.
with
No,
you.
no, I get it.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, the way I dress kind of, it makes sense that I want attention, but
It
I don't really. It's just, this is just me.
Well, like somebody said, you're kind of a rock and roll harmonica player now.
Well, kind of. I mean,
You know.
so, you know, Jerry McCain was kind of a rock and roll
He
harp player. He was a
was.
blues player, but
And
he was a
Magic
rock and roll
Dick.
player. Yeah, I mean, those guys are
Magic
great.
Dick, yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember I would go to the jams, and this is after, you know, I was playing about a year, and I was, you know, I learned some songs, and I could play. I could hold my own, at least at a jam. But
Right.
I didn't bring my stuff. I wanted to go and check out the scene first, because I just didn't want to go up there and not know what I was doing. You know,
Right.
I'm kind of a perfectionist. Like, if I was going to go there, I want to make sure, you know, I know my part. I know we're kind of doing keys that I'm familiar with and
Right.
positions that I can, you know, handle and all that stuff.
Right.
So I'd go to the jams and just meet up with other players and seek out, like, you know, a bass player or a keyboard player or especially a guitar player that played the kind of stuff that I
The
was
style, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, you know, we exchanged numbers, and
Right.
I chat with them. Maybe I'll come back next week and do a few songs, and most of them were cool with it. And then that's how I kind of wound up doing it. And eventually, after doing that, I started sitting in with other local bands. There's one local band I was playing with on a Steady Wednesday thing. The singer and guitar player was actually a professor at Rutgers.
Really?
Yeah. So that was fun. That was kind of like my first regular gig, and I wasn't even legal age yet.
Yeah.
But it was cool. And then I remember seeing a couple other great local players in the area, Trip Henderson from New York, and Steve Geiger also sat
Right.
in with a couple of these bands, and I would go
Right.
see Steve,
Yeah.
who's
Steve was
been
definitely, he's always been a local hero.
and he's
Yeah.
been a friend of mine since then. And
Yeah.
super great. One of my
Yeah.
favorite players.
He's an awesome
A
player.
good friend. And so I just go see him as much, and he started, you know, just kind of like not necessarily teaching me anything, but watching him and listening to him, I kind of absorbed his approach, and he was just a total pro. I mean, he could sing great, he could play great.
Yeah.
He never played too much, but he played just enough when he was
Yeah.
backing up people.
Yeah.
And you know, we just hung out a lot at some of the shows eventually, and I'd start sitting in with the bands he was, you know, sitting in with. And,
Right.
and we just became good friends, and you know, eventually some of those bands hired me to
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You play with Dean Schott a little bit, right?
I met Dean right when I first started playing. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so going way back. Yeah.
Yeah.
We weren't really in the same band, but he wanted to join one of the first bands that I was in, which only lasted a few months anyway, so that didn't really go anywhere. But yeah, we played together on and off here and there, and you know, he always was a great guitar player to play with because he seemed to know a lot of that stuff that harp went with.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
learned that.
Yeah.
So the other thing was you became a DJ fairly early on too, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was. It's funny how that came about. One of the program directors at WFDU in Teaneck, New Jersey, would come out to see me play sometimes. I mean, I didn't know who he was. I just, you know, familiar guy. I'd see him a lot, and he approached me one time and he said, you know, I'm so and so from. I'm like, oh, that's great. And I said, well, let me know if you ever have an opening, because I had in high school. They actually had a radio station. It was like one of the only high school I knew that had a radio station. It's usually like the colleges, you know? But our high school had a radio station, and I kind of, you know, I was playing. I had a regular Thursday show or whatever it was, and I would play, you know, just rock and roll stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I had Chuck Berry, AC/DC, and
Right,
that
right,
kind of
right.
stuff. You know, Little Richard, and so, you know, wouldn't you know? Like a year later, he's like, you know, we have a spot opening. Are you serious about wanting to be on the radio? I was like, yeah. I mean, I had my license to even do it.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah. So he invited me up to show me the ropes and see if I was serious about it. And I started. The show was almost on for, I think it was almost 15 years.
Wow.
Up in Teaneck, which was right outside the New York
Yeah.
City area. Yeah, and it was great. I mean, I had guests on my show. I had a bunch of people, and you know, it was almost 3 hours long. So it was a pretty nice run, and I miss doing it because I have a pretty big record collection,
Yeah,
and
I
I
figured.
love, you know, kind of sharing some of that stuff. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so eventually you were on the New Jersey scene for a while, but you eventually ended up playing with Doug Deming for how long were you and Doug playing together?
8 or 9 years I was
Okay.
with Doug. Yeah, I can't remember how that came about. I was kind of playing and touring regionally with my own thing for a while. Then I started playing with some other bands based out of New Jersey. I would do some stuff with Dave Gross or Peter Karp and
Right.
stuff. And I put together my tribute to Little Walter record. I think I put it together in 2008 or
Right.
2007. I think
Okay.
we were recording it. And you know, I wanted to branch out further, do more touring with it and stuff. And I was like, you know, my local guys I played with, they weren't really available or interested
Right.
in traveling a lot
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And just through the grapevine, through people like Kim Wilson and other musicians I knew on
Right,
the
because
scene.
Kim was working with him too.
Yeah. So his name popped up in from a few different people, and I just eventually we reached out to each other, and the first conversation we talked for a couple hours, and we just kind of hit it off because we were coming from the a lot of the same musical influences,
Right.
and wanted to do a lot of the same kind of stuff, and had similar goals. We want to branch out more, and so it just kind of happened. After when that record came out, I basically hired him and most of the guys he was using in his band to travel and support that record when it
The
came
Little
out.
Walter one?
Yeah, and I actually
Okay.
took Steve Geiger out with us. on
Right, I
some tours,
remember
and
that.
That was
I
pretty,
remember that,
That was
yeah.
pretty fun to have
Right.
Steve with us.
I remember that.
And then that ran its course for about a year or so, and then Doug was like, well, I'm doing a new record, you want to be on it, and maybe we can go on the road together. And it just kind of flowered into this thing where we kind of started, it became a regular thing.
Right.
I wasn't full-time, and I was still in New Jersey. He was in Detroit at the time, and eventually
Right.
he moved to Florida. I was still in New Jersey, but we would hook up on the road, and
Right.
we were like kind of like road partners.
So you'd fly in to wherever.
I'd usually fly in
The
to
tour
where
started or
I
whatever.
I drove the first time we met. I actually drove to the beginning of one of these tours, and I drove from New Jersey to Detroit in my van, and handshake and smile. We met and we started the tour.
Wow. That's heavy, yeah.
So
Big
that
trust there, huh?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we talked a lot back then.
Right.
To start off that whole thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how many records did you guys do together?
Well, we did our own records together with support from the
Okay,
others.
so you'd have him on your record.
Right. So I had my Rockin' All Day, and then Ready or Not.
Okay.
And he's fallen through the cracks, and he had I'm trying to think what was the other one. What's It Gonna Take, I think, was the other one that I was on, and I think I have an instrumental on that one too. But yeah, so my Rockin' All Day one, I wrote some songs, but he was doing the singing. But then when I did my Ready or Not one, I decided, I was writing a lot more, like I
Right.
was years ago, and I was like, I wanted everybody. Like 99% of my musician friends were like, you gotta sing. And I hate, because I don't like being in the spotlight. I didn't want to do that, but I was like, you know what? I need to just kind of take some more vocal lessons and just try to do it, because I wrote it's going to be my first all original album.
Right.
No,
So you
no
took
covers
singing
at all.
lessons?
I took some vocal
Yeah.
coaching and stuff,
Right.
and I decided I was just, make it happen.
Time to
So
do it.
Right. So I did that, and when that was happening, we kind of parted ways because Doug and I just had musical differences at that point,
Right.
and different goals really for what we wanted to do.
Right.
So
But you guys played all over, as I recall.
I mean,
You
we
toured
toured all
like
over the
nationally.
U.S. We went overseas a handful of
Okay.
times together. Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
We had some great stuff going on.
Right.
And that was great, and those guys were great. I mean, Andrew's still playing with them. I was
Yeah.
in the band obviously before Andrew was, but
Yeah.
I love playing with Andrew too.
Andrew's a
He was
great bass player.
great bass player, great guy.
Great guy.
So that was fun. And then, when that ran its course, I was called, ironically enough, by Hank Mowry, who put together the first gig that I did with Doug when I met Doug with the handshake and we got on the road.
Wow. Okay.
So Hank put together that first gig I did with Doug, and then Hank called me up and said, I want to do this benefit for the Headstone Project.
Right,
For blues
right.
musicians
Yeah.
with no headstones. He said, but I want to do a William Clark tribute, because he'd obviously been passed away at that point.
Mhm.
And I said, I'd love to be involved. I mean, I was a big fan of Bill's, and I'd love to be part of the show. So he wanted me to kind of like headline the show and do some William Clark songs. But he wasn't sure who to have as a band. And I was like, well, Nick Moss. I've done a few gigs with Nick Moss. I knew him. I was never part of the band.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, what? Maybe Nick knows how to play that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a great player.
Yeah.
So I called up Nick and asked if he wanted to do that, and we wound up doing this show. And a lot of it's on YouTube, I think. And it just went well. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I mean, I didn't know until after the show, Nick started hinting that there's going to be changes in the band. Now, he remembers telling me specifics, but I didn't remember specifics, maybe just because I was so wrapped up in the gig and, like it was kind of a new thing. I wasn't sure if I was going to kind of put music on hold for a little bit at this time or not, and just kind of work more stuff locally at home.
Right.
But he was having some personnel changes in the band coming up, and it just happened that we working more together, and things started happening.
Now, did you guys kind of do a musical chairs with Doug? Because I know Madison Slim moved down.
Yeah, no, that was just a weird a weird coincidence.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Madison played with Nick. I think.
Yeah, Matt, he's a great player, man.
Right.
Yeah, he's
and
still
then he
a friend.
ended up moving to Florida and playing with Nick.
Yeah,
so,
which wound up being with Doug, and that wound up being a really cool thing, for both of them.
That's what I meant, Doug. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was cool.
Yeah.
A great player. He's a great guy.
So, so you've been with Nick how long? You said 9 years or something?
Well, I was with Doug at that point, I guess about 8 or 9 years maybe. And then Nick, I guess we started working together at the end of 2016 or in 2017.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it was the end of 2016 we did that show. We did a few.
So
I joined.
So it's been about 9 years in.
Yeah. I guess about 8 or 9 years with Nick now. Yeah.
Right. And Rodrigo, how long has he been in?
Rodrigo's been with the band, I'm going to say, I don't know, is it 6 years now? 5 years now?
Is it?
I think so. I can't remember what year because we went through a couple bass players.
Right.
I'd have to think about, I can't remember what year, since the pandemic is kind of like, what year?
Right.
What year is this?
Yeah. That pandemic really did weird stuff to anyone's sense of time, I think.
Yeah. But I think he wasn't on the first record we recorded, but he was on the second. So I guess the second record came out in 2019 maybe? So this would be the 6th year. So yeah, I guess about 5 years.
So how many albums have you guys done on Alligator?
We did three records.
Okay, three
together.
records on Alligator.
Yep.
Okay, so the first record you did was already on Alligator.
Well, the first one,
Okay.
Well, me and Nick joined forces, and then we started doing a few tours together, and then we got asked on the Blues Cruise.
Right.
And then, me and Nick had both talked about Bruce at Alligator, obviously a bunch of times over the years, and he didn't seem that interested in making, what I was doing or what Nick was doing, although it was always nice to both of us. But when we joined forces, he seemed pretty interested.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly. So all these things just kind of started falling into place out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So we just figured, let's see what happens,
Well, it's a big deal being on Alligator if you're in blues, man.
Well, especially for me. I mean, the first record I heard
especially
was on Alligator.
with what you first heard.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. And Bruce is great. I mean, every person who runs a label has their specific things they like to do and they don't like to do, and they like their dislikes and all that stuff. But he's really on his game with the business end of things.
Oh, absolutely.
And I've always liked working
more
with
than
him.
anybody else.
And I've always liked working with him and his honesty, and
very honest.
I dig what he does. So
yeah. Well, do you guys produce your own records and then he just puts them out, or how's that work?
Well, Nick's more in charge of that. We'll go through the mixes and we'll all listen to that stuff. But basically after that, I think Nick and Bruce kind of go back and forth a little bit with the end production of how it all sounds.
Now, was the first record you guys did from Greaseland?
No, the first one was recorded in Nick's basement.
Oh, okay.
And then we did the second one in Greaseland.
Right.
Oh, well, the first one was in Nick's basement, but Kid was engineering.
Oh, really? The first one?
Yes.
Really?
And then we did the second one at Greaseland. Obviously, with Kid.
Yeah, because I remember when you guys were there.
Yeah, and the most recent one, Kid wasn't part of it, but it was back in Nick's basement.
Right.
And back there again.
We're talking about Alligator Records and some of the recording projects that Nick Moss and Dennis have done over the last 9 years or so.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of booking too, as I recall. Both you and Nick have done a lot of your own booking of tours. And talk about that a little bit, because I mean, all three of us know quite a bit about that.
Well, that's a 24/7 job, as
absolutely.
And when I was doing my own band at Jump Time and doing my own other projects early on, it was all me, obviously. And then, it was nice to put that on the back seat for a bit when I started touring and recording with other people for a couple of years.
Right.
But I know Nick the whole time was booking his own thing for all of these years. I went back to booking when I was working with Doug. We started splitting it at first, but it eventually wound up being basically all me. Yeah. And so yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
You know, and then of course what goes along with when you're doing your own booking, you're also doing most of your own promotion.
Right.
Or you have a few
Right.
other people in little spots help you out.
That's right.
But it also adds to the workload, you know.
Well, the interesting thing for me, and I'm sure it's with you guys too, is how when you get into doing that, it's multifaceted. You learn about the business.
Mm-hmm.
You also usually get a network of people that are able to help you with things.
Right.
In different parts of the country. I mean, I'm sure you did that, where you like you say, you talk to a Hank Mowry or somebody in Michigan or, you know, somebody in Florida that, you know,
can help out with this.
Yeah, can help out with, you know, where you go.
Right, and then you may know the radio guy who can help get the word out in this area of town. Or so it's a lot of work, and it's very accumulative. The more you do it, the more connections you make.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, if you don't use those connections as often, sometimes you can lose them too.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So how many times have you been to Europe so far?
Oh, a bunch.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I started going in Europe the first. I think the first time. It wasn't the first time in Europe. Well, it was one of my first times in Europe. I was with Dave Gross, I remember. And because I didn't go there with Jump Time or anything, but I did go over there with Dave. And, you know, I had a following, and I was just from some of my albums and stuff that I had put out prior to that.
Right.
But I love working with Dave, who's a great guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, we were getting off, literally stepping off the plane down the stairway, and I, like, my first 2 or 3 steps on the ground, it must have been in London or something.
Right.
And somebody comes up to me like, "Are you Dennis Gruenling?"
Really?
And Dave turned around like it was like,
how'd that happen?
Did you plant this guy?
Right.
And it was just some dude who followed me on YouTube or followed me in something, and
that's funny.
Yeah, but that must have been like 2000 and early 2000s.
Huh.
Maybe, I want to say, I don't know, it was 2004 or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there, maybe.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, and then somebody flew. I don't know if you know Mason, who has since passed. He was a harp player in Germany, but he flew me over to do a couple concerts. I played with Alex Schultz over there.
Oh, okay.
And I taught some classes over there, and that was something I did on my own. But I did a few I think I did 2 shows with Alex Schultz, and that was I think maybe just a couple of years after that.
You must have done Trossingen too.
I have.
I would think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I love, I've probably been to Germany and Norway the most.
Huh.
But,
Okay.
But I've been all over Europe for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Spa. You've done Spa.
I've been going to Spa.
A load of times.
Yeah. Well, I've been friends with Joe Falisco since the early 90s.
Right.
And he talked me into going to Spa. I think my first one was maybe 94, 95.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I met Richard Slay actually the same day I met Joe, way back when.
Do you work on your own harps at all?
I used to, but not so much anymore. Only in case of emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
I just got tired of doing that, really.
Yeah.
And honestly, the harps now from Hohner that I play, they last a lot longer because I think they're made better, but also I play better.
Right. Right.
But I play them right out of the box and rarely have an issue with them going out of tune. I mean, my harps last me a long time.
Right.
I mean, I always have backups with me on the road because you got to have backups.
Yeah.
But absolutely. I learned how to do that years ago, and I just haven't done much of it in the past 5 or 10 years. Really.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been sponsored by them? I'd imagine quite a while.
Quite a while. I'm trying to remember when it became official, because since day one, I was playing Hohner. And, my first handful of years, I tried everything. Or other manufacturers, guys at the shows were like, they give you, hey, try this out, you're going to like this one.
Right, yeah.
And honestly, just the plain old truth is, some of them were decent, but I didn't like any of them as much as I like the Hohner Marine Band style. Right. That's just what I love.
Yeah.
It feels better to me, it sounds better to me, it responds better in feel to me, so that's
Did you play Falisco's for a while?
I did, and I still have some that Velisco and Slay had fixed up for me from like the late '90s. I still have some
That's
that
how
still
I am too.
work.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the straight up Marine bands, and have since I play a lot of crossovers now. Of course, I'm on those boxes, but they had the Marine Band Deluxe, which is
Right.
also a
You
great
got your
harp.
picture on one.
I got my picture on
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
That's exciting.
So, yeah, it's pretty exciting, and
Yeah.
and it is for real my go-to harp. I mean, I think
Yeah.
those crossovers
The
are the best
crossovers,
harps
yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
Out of the box.
No, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sponsored by Seidel, so
Ah.
I shouldn't talk too much about Honers, but
Yeah. Well,
the
I mean,
crossovers are good harps.
I mean,
I think with Seidel, when Seidel came on the scene, it seems like Honer really stepped up their game.
well, definitely since Seidel came on the scene. Also, in I would say even the past 5 years, there's been more and more competition, or just more players in the game.
Right.
And I think companies, Seidel and Honer and whoever else is still out there now, has decided, most of them have done it, I think, have decided if we don't
make
if
these
we don't step
better,
up our
yeah,
game, we're
yeah.
gonna
Exactly.
And Honer, it's pretty well known that there was a period that the Honer quality went down for a little bit, but they have raised up the quality so much in recent years that, like, even though someone like me who used to play almost all custom harps from Velisco and Slay, that I play them right out of the box.
Right.
Tom blocking, overblowing, everything.
Right.
And
Yeah, there was a period there where I could not even play Honers.
Yeah. But they really have gotten on that game.
Good
now.
thing. Well, my other question is, as far as influences go, and I mean, I know you're obviously into all the heavyweight harp players that we all love, but it seems like you've also kind of gone in a direction of listening to other stuff and listening to, and kind of, I mean, I remember calling you up one time and I said, wow, I heard you, I think it was with, who's the guy from Milwaukee? Joel Patterson. And you were playing some, like, almost like Lester Young type stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It was just wicked.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean...
And it was really inventive, and it was really spot on.
Well, thanks. Lester Young is one of my favorite musicians of all time.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Lester Young, sax player, P.B. Russell, clarinet player, I mean, I play harmonica, but I'm more of a music freak than I am, I think, a harmonica freak.
Right.
Harmonica just happens to be what feels right for me.
Yeah.
But I love Lester Young and Red Prysock and a lot of great sax players.
Right.
But yeah, Lester Young in particular is my favorite.
Yeah.
And P.B. Russell on clarinet. They're both kind of otherworldly when you listen to just their phrases and the amazing kind of that it's like a great, an old school R&B or country song lyric. You hear things that seem so simple and obvious, yet nobody wrote that line before. And melodically, like when you listen to Lester Young on sax or P.B. Russell, some of it can be abstract and out there, but yet when you hear it, it just makes so much sense. And I love that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I have a lot of influences aside from the classic harp players.
Yeah.
But I learned to play better harp through listening to the harp players.
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because somebody like William Clark was very much influenced by things other than harmonica.
Sure.
With when it came to like B3 players and the horn players that played along with,
Oh yeah.
Who am I thinking of?
Well,
blind
Willis Jackson.
Yeah, Willis Jackson, for
who
example.
played a lot with, all those.
Yeah.
Those jazz organ trio guys.
Right.
With
Bill Jennings and,
Exactly, yeah. Brother Jack McDuff.
Brother Jack, yeah.
Because they all had records they did together,
Right,
or Brother
right.
Jack with Bill Jennings, or Brother Jack with Willis
Yeah.
Jackson, and they all, all that stuff, the Jimmy Smith stuff, the Shirley
Right.
Scott stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even the early Stanley Turn team with Shirley Scott is incredibly bluesy, soulful stuff.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It lends itself really well to
it does.
the kind of stuff we're doing.
Yeah, and even not even just the copy licks, but just like the mood and the feel that they're presenting. Just like you mentioned that stuff I did with Joel Patterson. There's a couple things on YouTube, but like that earlier stuff, jazz stuff from like the Benny Goodman, Charlie Christian era, which I love too.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that stuff is very
Absolutely.
bluesy, but it's so swinging. I got so
Right.
excited when I discovered that stuff.
Right.
You know, and I love that stuff
Yeah.
so much. You know, and it's coming from a different place when you look at the phrasing and the timing on some of that stuff, but it's still blues, it's still soulful, you know? So it's just, I love that period from like the late 30s into the early 50s. Because there was just so much
Me too.
swinging, cool stuff happening.
And I mean, guys like Little Walter were totally into it.
Oh, you can even Sonny Boy One, you can hear.
Yeah, Sonny Boy One and Rice Miller, all
Yeah.
those guys really, they were all really influenced by what was going on at the time in the 40s and 50s.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally,
Yeah, Gene Ammons or whatever.
Oh yeah, all that stuff. Louis Jordan was a
Louis
huge
Jordan
one.
was a huge influence.
You can hear the influence on both Sonny Boy One and Little Walter.
Yeah.
Big time.
Well, I remember the first time I heard Louis Jordan do the lick on that Little Walter used on My Bay, where he goes ba 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 ba,
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
And I went, wow, that's where he got it from.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of that borrowing going on.
Yeah.
In this.
Tisket a tasket, things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Well, what are your plans for the future? I mean, you're obviously playing a ton with Nick, and
Oh yeah.
and do you still think about doing solo records? Or?
Sure. I had a bunch of tunes that I was gonna lay down for new recording before the pandemic thing happened. So it was just put on hold for a while, but I'm getting back thinking to do it. You know, probably be a little bit more in the rock and roll vein than what I'm known for. Because, you know, I mean, when I started out, I was doing like a jump blues thing because I love that 40s, early 50s, early rock and roll / jump blues, boogie woogie kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I started, and with Doug Deming, it was kind of a mix of a lot. There was some rockabilly, there was some traditional Chicago blues, but not a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot of jump blues. And now with Nick, a lot of focus obviously on the Chicago stuff,
Right.
which was one of my first harmonica loves.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, I also, you know, I want to do other stuff. You know, I still plan on working with Nick, of course. And I think what we have going on with the band, and especially with Rodrigo too, I mean, it's a tight band, it's a solid band. And I love those guys. So I want to still do that, but I still want to do more of my own solo stuff. I've been singing more and writing more, so probably more of a rocking thing moving forward.
And talk about California, because I mean, you've been out there, what, 5 years?
Almost 8 years now.
8 years.
Almost,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember I was in Europe and we were talking, and you go, "I'm moving to LA," and I was like,
Yeah.
"Wow,
Yeah.
that's a hell of a deal."
Well, you know, even before I played music, I wanted to come out to LA because I was a rocker and I was, you know, the whole scene.
Right.
And it almost happened a couple different times, but it just never lined up or felt right. So it hasn't happened until, you know, it happened. But I love it.
Do you?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's still.
So you feel pretty at home
I do.
being in LA?
I do. I love it there.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's a lot of musicians there. And in general, I mean, there's just a lot of artists. I think that the whole scene of just all kinds of art, there's a lot of blues and rock and roll and rockabilly and boogie woogie and old school traditional artists out there still, I think.
And you got the film industry out
Got
there,
the
which
film
I know
industry.
you're.
Yes, I mean, you know, I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah.
I can't lie. I mean, you know, I'm a huge David Lynch fan,
Right,
so just being in that area was also a big pull for me. I mean, I can't lie about
I
that.
can see that.
So for sure, but it's just the whole arts scene in general is a big draw for me. Definitely.
Yeah, and then you've you've played on a ton of shows now with Piazza and.
Yep, I've been doing a lot of shows with Rod, and kind of crazy. I mean, you know, he is still sounding the same way he did, you know, 30 some odd years ago when I first saw him. Still with that powerful sound, the control of the instrument. You know, I can't think of many players who really have that control. And it's not even just the technique, because he really kind of developed his own sound and style that a lot of players, you know, copy and imitate. But his sense of timing too is like kind of so impeccable with the band and what he's done over the years. One of the things that kind of makes him unique unchromatic or diatonic, you know, and he still kind of is doing his thing, which is kind of crazy.
Do your thing,
After
baby.
all that, he's still doing it, man. He's still sounding amazing, and you know, so it's pretty awesome to do the shows with him. It's been a lot of fun. He's been super cool sharing the stage with. And,
yeah. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, super
That's
cool.
good for you, man.
Yeah, it's been really cool.
Well, cool, man. Well, thank you, Dennis.
Hey, thank you, man.
Yeah,
It's been. I appreciate you doing this, man.
And
you know?
yeah, you're making big impressions on people out here.
Well,
No,
I hope.
are.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm having a lot of fun. You know, it's funny because people will come up to me and be like, "Oh, well, that guy, you know, he really likes to get out there with the crowd, and he really likes to be in the spotlight." And still, I'm the same dude. It's just, I'm just more at home. I'm more comfortable being myself. Is
Right.
what it is.
Right.
And I think really, I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with me. Like in life, not even just making music, like in life, that's one of the secrets, really.
Oh yeah.
Being more comfortable.
Being comfortable.
Being yourself and just kind of being more at ease with it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, blues is such a it's a type of music where there's all this kind of stigma that, you know, can go along with it, you know, about how you're supposed to dress and how you're supposed to act. And, you know, there's a lot of that kind of thing in blues, and
there is, and I will tell you this, and you know, whether you want to keep this in or not, you know, it's up to you. But what I would consider the originators of this music, the pioneers of this music, the few of them that I've gotten to know, some a little and some more extensively through the years, all of them were like, just be yourself, do yourself. Never, don't try to be anybody else. You dress the way you want to dress, as long as you're being yourself, being respectful of the music and the people. If you're being true to yourself, that was always the most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think in not even just in the blues music, but in the whole artist community, I mean, that's really what it's about.
Well, it's how you make a dent in things.
True.
You know, if you don't have that, I don't know how you can make a dent.
True.
You know, how you can make an impression. Without that.
Right. So I always, you know, I mean, I am myself and I am a little different and I know that. But it was nice, like early on, to hear that from some older guys too, that were doing it, that were known.
Right.
And I felt like it was kind of like okay.
An affirmation.
Right. Like you can do this and be who you are and still do your thing.
Right.
Yeah, it was really cool. So that's just what I'm trying to do.
Well, good, man. Well, much success, Dennis.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.